everything was signal. So it got to the point where he'd be, hey, Tay, look over. And by the way, Derek started Tay. I don't know, people don't really know that, so I'm gonna let everybody know.
Oh, wow.
Tay, everybody called me D Money, like growing up, like that's what it was. It was more D. He started that, so he'd look out, Tay, and he'd be like, and I'd know just based off coverage, we got 0. That ain't a signal. He'd look over like, hey.
Right.
And I'm like, I might have a slant fade right now, throw it, beat him off the line, and that's really where the releases started, and people starting to give me like that crown of being able to, you know what I'm saying, get off the line of scrimmage. Was that it was a lot of situations where I gotta win now, especially like I go to Green Bay and I'm playing with dudes like Jordy and Randall. I gotta show Aaron, if he look over there, he ready to get this ball right now. So that's why I just started saucing dudes and doing that. But it really started at Fresno, look over and get that look from Derek, like something like that, and then I know I'm up at the sideline.
Let's talk about chemistry. The reason why Davante Adams is going to continue absolutely shredding defenses in Vegas this year, just like he did in Green Bay, is not just the fact that he's a really great technician with a ton of elite traits, or the fact that Derek Carr himself is a good quarterback in his own right. It's that both of them together already have the main component that made Adams and Aaron Rodgers so deadly together too, and that's chemistry. At its core, the wide receiver position is about just getting to the right spot at the right time by any means necessary as a route runner. And conversely, at its own core, the quarterback position is about throwing it to the right spot at the right time based on how you read coverages. High-level quarterbacks do not throw to where a route is drawn up to be in the playbook because they know that most of the time those routes are going to have to be adjusted based on where the safeties are and what kind of techniques the corners are playing. Instead, they'll throw to a predetermined spot based on the read that both they and the receiver are also making in real time. That, in a nutshell, is what quarterback and receiver chemistry actually is. It's reading coverages together from two different positions and being on the same page in terms of how the same route might have to be run 4 different ways against 4 different defenses. I want to give a bunch of examples here for how, in my opinion, the most dangerous route in Davante Adams' arsenal, the boundary fade, was run very differently and also thrown very differently by Rodgers based on what the pre-snap coverage look was. And I see no better place that we can possibly start at than this throw against the 49ers last year because it is downright disgusting. But before I can explain all of the little technical nuances of this read and why this route was thrown this way, I want to thank Factor for making this episode possible. Factor makes meeting your nutrition goals easier than ever by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to your doorstep. All Factor meals arrive pre-prepared and ready to eat in just 2 minutes, which is perfect for either really busy days where you don't have time to cook, or maybe you work in an office and you want something that both tastes good and is healthy that you can just toss in the microwave for lunch. And personally, at this point, I've had everything from the herb-crusted chicken to the roasted garlic braised beef, and as far as microwavable quick meals go, these are some of the best I've ever had. The meats are tender, the potatoes are fluffy, the seasonings and sauces are actually real seasonings and sauces, and the smoothies are pretty good too. It's just high quality food that you can make in 2 minutes, which for me, considering how often I basically have 15 minutes to eat my lunch because of how busy I am, that ends up being pretty valuable. So if you yourself are looking for really quick meal options to get you through a hectic day, I think Factor is definitely worth giving a try just to see if you like it. And if you do want to try it out, you can use my promo code by heading to go.factor75.com/filmroom130 and use promo code filmroom130 to get $130 off. Again, that is go.factor75.com/filmroom130, promo code filmroom130 for $130 off. Thank you again to Factor for sponsoring today's show, and with that, let's get back to it. The Packers are running a vertical concept here that at least Kyle Shanahan refers to as Nebraska. Don't ask me why he calls it that, I have no idea, that's just what the route is called. But Rodgers is going to entirely ignore that out and up and the seam route on the front side, and instead he's going to focus on the boundary fade backside from Adams because he's got him one-on-one. Now, because this post safety is lined up so deep, he's at about 16 or 17 yards off the ball, we can pretty confidently anticipate that this is going to be some kind of single high safety coverage, whether that's cover 3 or maybe cover 1, or some kind of middle field close man pressure look like this one actually is. And that is great news for Rodgers and Adams because that means that this safety is likely not going to be screaming over the top to bracket that fade, so said fade should be one-on-one all the way. However, not all single high safety coverages are created equal, and in the NFL, defenses can and will lie to you. There's always going to be the threat of some kind of batshit insane rotation in the secondary like what we see the Chiefs do every week. So the two numbers that you need to remember here are 18 and 22. 22 yards is the exact depth that a boundary fade is taught to be thrown at in a lot of West Coast offenses, but for the purposes of Adams and Rodgers against a single high safety pre-snap look, if that ball is spotted on the hash and the post safety is also lined up on the hash in what's called a lean post technique, that's going to be a little bit tricky because technically that safety could still be in range to make a play on the ball if you leave it hanging deep to be caught at that 22-yard depth. So instead, in response to that alignment, you want to protect that throw and convert it into a back shoulder ball by throwing it to a spot at roughly 18 yards past the line of scrimmage, where Davante can then adjust to it and box out that corner. If that safety was not lined up directly on the hash as a lean post, and if he were more towards the actual middle of the field, that would have left a bit more space for Rodgers to air it out at a 22-yard depth and kind of drop it in the bucket over his shoulder like it's drawn up in the playbook. And from there, Adams could have then run under it and maybe even scored. But again, unfortunately, that safety was on the hash, so Rodgers had to throw it back shoulder instead. However, what does that same route look like against a different coverage with a slightly different position from the safety? Again, remember the numbers 18 and 22. Off of the motion here from Alan Lazard, the Browns check out of a quarters coverage look against 2x2, and they're checking into a cover 3 look against 3x1 from the Packers, which is important because in cover 3, the safety is not leaning to Adams this time because he has to lean towards the passing strength of the formation instead. So the Browns are trusting Denzel Ward out there completely on an island against Adams. Remember, even in zone coverages, if you're looking at 3x1 from the offense, meaning 3 receivers on one side and then 1 isolated receiver backside, they're not going to zone off against that 1 receiver. They're just basically going to play man on that side and say, go win. So the fact that there's no safety help here for Ward tells Adams that this ball is not going back shoulder. There is zero chance that this safety is going to be able to get all the way from inside the hashes back out to the boundary. So Adams knows that Aaron is going to let this thing fly out to that 22-yard spot down the boundary. That is the unspoken read here. You got to get to 22 yards. So Davante's job, come hell or high water, is to get to that 22-yard spot. So here's how he does that. At the top of most of his routes against a press coverage look like this one, Adams likes to take a rhythm step with his back foot, and then he'll kind of hop directly into the corner's face to close as much space as possible. He wants that corner to get nervous and back up because of how quickly he closes in, and if that DB responds with a jam, he's already got his hands up and he's ready for combat anyway. Interestingly enough though, Ward is not jamming here, and instead he does a technique called soft shoeing, which is pretty much press coverage but without the pressing part. And the reason Ward is doing that is because A, he wants to maintain good positioning inside in case Adams is running a slant here, and B, when staying in phase hip to hip down the field, he also wants to have easier access to play through Adams' back shoulder in case Rodgers puts the ball at that 18-yard landmark. So clearly, in my opinion at least, Ward was studying what Adams and Rodgers like to do when they get a lot of one-on-ones down the boundary. However, again, Rodgers is not throwing it to that 18-yard spot here because the safety is not a threat. So he's going to throw it to 22 yards and leave it outside where only his receiver can get it, and Adams knows that. Davante is immediately burning to get down the field and trying to stack on top of Ward so that he can then shield Ward away from the ball with his own body at that target depth, which is obviously where he was able to finish the catch. And honestly, if Ward did not somehow trip up Adams with his feet as he went flying past him here, Davante probably would have scored. That's how badly Ward got beat. And this is also, by the way, a great example of why, no matter what, you really never want to give Davante a free release down the boundary. I know he's famous for back shoulder catches, but if you give him access, he will burn you over the top. He's still got that kind of juice. So that's 2 different throws for the same route based on 2 different positions for a safety in a single high safety look. But what about 2 high safety looks? Can Adams and Rodgers still run a fade to the boundary even if Harrison Smith is screaming out into a cover 2 shell before the snap, specifically just to take that throw away? Well, yeah, you bet your ass they can, and that's where chemistry once again comes into play. As soon as Smith backed out here into that too high safety look, the spot that Adams had to get to completely changed. Rodgers cannot leave this ball hanging at an 18-yard depth because Smith is just hoping for any opportunity he can get to turn Davante into a fine pink mist, and he for damn sure can't put it even further down the field at 22 yards either. So the target spot is now actually shortened into being a back shoulder ball at 11 yards instead. Adams knows that he just has to get outside of the corner and widen himself enough so that he can turn for the ball immediately. That is his only job, is just get to that spot, which of course he did because he's Davante Adams. But once again, what I find most fascinating about this play is how he did it and how he was able to release so cleanly. The corner is not in true press technique here. Some DB coaches call this catch technique because you're basically just mirroring the release for as long as possible and then catching the receiver rather than trying to disrupt the receiver. But Adams approaches this catch technique in a very similar way to how he approaches soft shoe press. He's going to close that space as quickly as possible and try to get the corner to panic a little bit, and then he can win with his feet. Watch the footwork that he puts on this DB here to get free access to the boundary once again. As he's taking that exact same hop to get in the corner's face and kind of square him up in close quarters, he puts his eyes outside of the sideline and he slightly extends that right leg out. Everything about that little movement says, I am planting on that right foot, I am giving you a head fake, and then I'm going back inside because the wider foot, from a biomechanical standpoint, is usually going to be the foot that you plant on when you're making a move at the top of your route. But for Adams, it's not. It's really more like an illusion, and he's just skimming that right foot across the ground to get that DB to fall for the bait, like he's planting with that foot, while he's actually planting with his left foot instead and exploding off of that to get back outside. Within 4 steps, Davante's in perfect position to shield that corner away from that back shoulder ball, and his head is already turned around to look for it. And of course, with Rodgers' accuracy to put that ball high and away, there was very little that the corner could do to stop it. To me, this is what chemistry actually is on the football field. It's a receiver knowing how a route must be adjusted based on the coverage that the quarterback is reading, and the quarterback then trusting his receiver to get to that new spot based on that coverage. Rodgers and Adams have been the best duo in the league when it comes to chemistry for years now, and so naturally the question when Adams left Green Bay was, will he be able to do this same kind of stuff and be just as productive in Vegas without Rodgers actually throwing him the ball? And to me, the answer is yes, because a lot of Davante's production in Green Bay wasn't just about being a great route runner or dominant at the catch point. It was about the fact that he could read coverages the same way his quarterback could read them. And believe it or not, in my opinion, Derek Carr might be the only human being on planet Earth that has more chemistry with Adams than Rodgers does. They are best friends after all, they've known each other since they were teenagers, and in a lot of ways Davante's connection with Carr at Fresno State and how they would just kind of make things up as they went along, that was the reason why Adams was eventually able to develop that same bond with Rodgers. Unfortunately for the rest of the AFC West, I am pretty sure that this is going to work. And I'm pretty sure that it's going to work really, really well. So whatever your expectations are for the Raiders this season, I don't know, maybe slightly adjust them. They might be even better than you think, and they were already a playoff team last year. And also, by the way, one more side note that only has a little bit to do with this episode. If you can find a way to go to a game in person in Vegas, 100% do that. One of the best stadium experiences I've ever had in my life. The atmosphere is utterly ridiculous in the best possible way. It's like a freaking party in there. Raider Nation is a great fan base. The city is awesome. The stadium is nuts. Just go to a Raider game in person, especially if you get to watch these two work together live and in person. It is almost indescribable, and I can't wait to go back. So, if you take nothing else away from this episode, go to a Raider game in Vegas. 100% worth it. Now, as for me, I am going to be gone from this channel for a couple weeks, but if for some reason you can't go more than a couple days without seeing my ugly ass face, I still do have plenty of content coming out over on my podcast channel, the Bootleg Football Podcast. We're kind of reviewing what happened in the preseason, looking ahead to the regular season, and trying to predict, Super Bowl winners and playoffs and all that kind of stuff. So a lot more content coming out over on that channel, but nothing here for a couple weeks until we have some actual regular season games to review. So hope you guys are going to come back for that. And until then, later.